Good afternoon, Nova Nation. Happy Monday, and welcome here inside of the WXVU studio for another live edition of Villanova Sports Talk. So much to get to with the football team and also the Roommate Show podcast. We'll break it down for you all coming up over the next 60 minutes here on WXVU. David Szczepanski alongside Stephen Cain. Steve, how you doing today?
Doing good, David. Doing good. Definitely tough result over the weekend for Villanova football, but we'll get into it. I still think I'm pretty bullish on Villanova throughout the rest of the season, but again, we'll talk about it. And then how about that Eagles win yesterday? Have the Go Birds.
I like it. That's a nice sweatshirt.
See it.
The camera can.
Yeah, the
for
camera
sure.
can just a little bit, but yeah, that was a really inspiring win. But unfortunately, Villanova couldn't get the job done on Saturday. So, because otherwise we could celebrate two really nice wins, but fortunately just one.
We'll have to settle for 50%,
Yeah.
But a lot to get to, and of course a lot of season left to go for the Wildcats as well. So coming up over the next 60 minutes, as I said, we'll give a recap of Villanova versus Monmouth. We'll talk about our trip to West Long Branch, New Jersey. We'll specifically break down the stats. We'll talk about Pat McQuaid, who I thought had a pretty good second half for Villanova. We'll talk about David Abbott, who was probably the best player for Villanova on Saturday. Talk about what went well, what went wrong. We'll take a break, and then we'll head in the second half of today's show. We'll talk about the CAA standings. We'll give an update on the power rankings. Both polls were updated probably about 30 to 45 minutes ago. And then we'll end with a preview of Villanova versus William & Mary. And of course, we'll talk about the Roommate Show as well, which pretty much, for those that don't know, replaced Hoops Mania on Wednesday. We'll give our thoughts on that. We'll have our WXVU member Ryan Scanlon join the show as well towards the end of today's program. And at the very end of today's program, closer to 1 o'clock, I'll reveal our special guest who's going to join us 1 week from today on Monday, September 29th on Villanova Sports Talk. So looking forward to it. So much to get to in the next 60 minutes. Steve, we're going to start with our trip to West Long Branch, New Jersey, Kessler Stadium. It was great to be there for this game. We were on the roof, as we said during the broadcast. Had some technical difficulties, probably because we were set up on the roof, the fifth floor. But still a really good atmosphere, really good time to be there. And we were actually talking to some of the facilities staff after the game, and they had said that was the first time the Kessler Stadium has ever been sold out in their entire history. Now, it is a smaller stadium. Villanova Stadium, of course, is somewhere around 10,000 seats. Kessler Stadium is only 4,200, so definitely a much smaller scale. But it's a really beautiful stadium. There was a great environment there. Unfortunately, like you said, Steve, Villanova could not get the job done. But all in all, it was a good trip. Second straight year that we were there in West Long Branch, and definitely a really good stadium if you have the chance to check it out.
Yeah, it was a fun trip going up there. It was windy once again. It makes sense.
I feel like it's always windy in that part of North Jersey. We were talking about it like a little bit off air, a little bit on air on the broadcast on Saturday, but I feel like North Jersey beaches are just cold and windy. Is that the true? I hope it's not for like July and June, but still.
Yeah. As you said, it makes sense. It's close to the Jersey Shore, less trees. There's just going to be more wind out there, and we were even talking about it too. I guess it didn't really matter with how the game played out on Saturday, but that's a really kind of sneaky, nice home field advantage that Monmouth has. And again, a little bit of a spoiler, but Monmouth, they have a great offense, but they also have a very aggressive offense. And what does aggressiveness mean? Going for it on fourth down. And because they're so good offensively, they can do that successfully, I think, heading into the game. And again, this didn't matter. Monmouth didn't go for any fourth downs on the game on Saturday, but they were second in the FCS in fourth down conversions. And basically that serves them well because it's very windy. If you're Monmouth, you're in scoring position, it's 4th and 2, rather than rely on your kicker to kick the ball and it's super windy and you run the risk of potentially missing a field goal. You can just say, screw it, we're Monmouth, we're really good offensively, we're just going to go for it. And they're used to that, going for it a lot, being very aggressive because, and again, we'll get to it, they're probably the best offense in the entire country. And then other teams that maybe are more conservative, right? Villanova's more conservative on fourth down. Really almost any other team in the country doesn't go for it as much on fourth down or complete it as successfully as Monmouth does. They all of a sudden feel pressured because think about it, if Monmouth's going for it on fourth down, they're probably scoring more points. That just leads to the other team being in an even more negative game script. Then they have to go for it themselves, and they're kind of uncomfortable doing that, and then they probably won't get the fourth down. And Monmouth's pretty good at defending those fourth downs as well. Kind of a little nugget there. So it's just interesting. They kind of have a nice little like home field advantage. It's a very unique kind of home field that they have, but just something that stood out to me. And it's a unique stadium, right? There's no bleachers on the other side. It's just one big wall that kind of goes up at a 45-degree angle. We were at the very top of it, so we were able to feel the full effects of the wind. But it was cool going up there, again, a little over an hour from Villanova.
I believe, though, they did add a beer garden. That was the new thing they added this year. No stands on the far side, of course, but still a really good overall scene and atmosphere. And as we said on Villanova Sports Talk last week, it really was like a playoff atmosphere really in September with 2 top 25 teams going at it. Of course, we'll break down the score and everything that went wrong for Villanova in that game and some things that Villanova did do well. We'll talk about some of the positives, as we always do. Try to give some positives as well. Let's get to the poll questions. On my Twitter, at WXVU David S. Poll question number 1. What is the biggest concern for Villanova after the loss to Monmouth? The secondary, too many penalties, the rushing defense, or the passing attack? Poll question number 2. Who will win Saturday's CAA matchup at Villanova Stadium, Villanova or William & Mary? Poll question number 3. Did you attend the roommate show recording at the Finneran Pavilion, yes or no? And then poll question number 4. Despite the loss, what Villanova football player impressed you the most against Monmouth? David Abbott, Antonio Johnson, Pat McQuaid, or Brandon Binkowski? Again, you can vote on my Twitter at WXVU David S. Well, we'll start with the overall score. We'll talk about the overall stats in this game. I'm sure most people that follow Villanova football or listen to our show know what happened. But Monmouth defeated Villanova by a final score of 51-33. And honestly, the score could have been much worse for Villanova. It was an 18-point loss for the Wildcats, but they were down in the 20s at some point. And just the way that Monmouth started off this game and Villanova did not start off this game, it definitely could have been much worse. But Villanova was able to. Their offense, especially in the second half, was able to battle, which I give them a lot of credit for. But yeah, the game, and we were talking about this on Saturday on the broadcast, I believe in the post-game show as well. The game, you don't want to say was decided. It definitely wasn't. But when Villanova decided to give Monmouth the football to begin the game and defend rather than taking it in the first half and defending to begin the second half. I thought, again, hindsight always 20/20, but in the moment I feel like we both said that wasn't the right decision, at least what we would have done. And again, there's analytics that back up everything. But when you gave Monmouth the opportunity to score on the first drive, they scored on the second play. And from there, Villanova was just trying to play catch up, and they never really could catch up to Monmouth in this game. And it was a big part because Monmouth outscored Villanova 31-14 in that first half. But kind of just breaking down some more, stats just in general here. Second half was close. I mean, Monmouth only scored one more point than Villanova did in the final 30 minutes of this game. Now, again, in the fourth quarter, Monmouth did take out some players on the defensive side of the football, but Derek Robertson was in there for the entire game. He had 30 passing attempts, made 20 completions. But that was probably the biggest takeaway from this game was how good Derek Robertson is, right? 20 for 30, 397 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 67% completion percentage. And that really was kind of a bad day for him in terms of completion percentage. He's usually a little bit higher than that. And then also, too, just Villanova's defense really struggled. And, we talked about that over the last couple days since the game. The secondary, which made a lot of strides in that game against Penn State, especially in the first half, in my opinion, just really kind of reversed itself in this game against the Hawks in terms of the positives that we were taking away. Zamir Dawood, I thought, had a pretty competitive game, but there was a couple penalties that we were talking about that he picked up. And just the secondary as a whole, I think, definitely, and we've talked about this season, is just young. They're still trying to learn, and that's part of, the process when you lose a lot of defensive starters. And they also missed some tackles as well, which was clear, and that was something that really plagued them in the game against Colgate in the season opener. So those were the two biggest takeaways for me, honestly, was just how good of a quarterback Derek Robertson is. Probably should be in the FBS at some level. And then, two, defensively for Villanova, just the secondary really struggled in the game. And, in addition to that, I think you kind of talk about the whole defense because there wasn't really a whole lot of pressure on Derek Robertson, especially in that first half. I mean, he just had plenty of time to throw, and that allowed guys like Josh Derry and TJ Spate to get open, and even Makai Green as well. So those are the two biggest takeaways for me, Steve.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think what stands out to me, I would agree, is the secondary, just because you give up, and we were talking about this on Saturday, almost 20 yards of yards per completion for Monmouth, and it's just very difficult if you're the Villanova defensive backfield and you're trying to limit this Monmouth passing attack to keep Villanova in the game when you're giving up those types of numbers. But I think, again, what was even more surprising, and we touched on this in the post-game show, was you knew in a way that Derek Robertson, Josh Derry, TJ Spate, and Trey Neal, Maxwell James, and others, the bevy of weapons that Monmouth and offensive coordinator Jeff Gallo have at their disposal, that they were going to get what they want. in certain drives, and a lot of drives really, against a Villanova secondary that probably was a little tired after the Penn State game. You know, they played pretty well in certain spots there, but largely that was pretty difficult. And then to play a high octane FCS passing attack, you expected them to struggle a little bit. They're still very young and there's still a lot of season left, but you just thought that had a high chance of happening. But what was really surprising was just the lack of run defense, and you touched on it too. Minimal pressure on Derek Robertson, right? Only a couple hurries on the quarterback, and even I think that those were a little bit generous, right? Whoever the stat keeper was, there really weren't a lot of times where Derek Robertson felt a lot of immediate pressure in the game. You think back to the great touchdown throw he had to Josh Derry, where he got hit right after as he threw the ball. That was really the only, I would say, meaningful hurry or pressure, whatever you want to call it, on Derek Robertson, and that can't happen if you're Villanova, especially since coming into the season you had Nigel McSween, Aiden Howard, Capri Martin, Obina Wabodo, and others all coming back. These are all names. None of these guys are new, and none of those guys we really had to familiarize ourselves with through the first couple games of the season, like we had to do with Anthony Hawkins or Jamie Tyson or Demille Bostic Jr., right? Or Garrett Rogan, right? A lot of these guys are newer, and you're willing to give them a little bit of a pass, right? Even though they shouldn't have allowed 51 points and a lot of those passing touchdowns, right? Robertson threw 4 passing touchdowns in the game. You're willing to excuse it just a little bit, but I think that was the most concerning. And Rodney Nelson on the ground, he was really good for Monmouth. 33 carries, career high for him, almost 200 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns, almost 6 yards a carry for Monmouth. That's what he averages. He's a top back, not just in the CAA, but in the entire country in terms of FCS football. And again, you touched on it, the missed tackles, but particularly from the front three, I should say, and then really the front 7. I thought it was concerning. They really should have played better and should have got to Derek Robertson more.
Villanova only had 1 sack in the game, was recorded by Shane Hartzell. No surprise there. Monmouth had 3 sacks in the game, and there was a lot more pressure for Monmouth as well, just clearly on Pat McQuaid, than there was for Villanova against Derek Robertson. Now, Monmouth's offensive line is very good, and they do a good job of protecting Robertson, and the amount of weapons that he has, helps. In the game that Rodney Nelson had also helped the passing attack. But I agree. I thought that the lack of pressure really hurt Villanova. And in the second half, I did think it was better, but in the first half, there was just way too much time for him to throw. And in addition, we talked about the missed tackles, talked about, the lack of pressure on Robertson. A lot of times the receivers for Monmouth were just wide open. Now, part of that is the combination of they're just really good, right? Josh Derry, 8 receptions, 177 yards. Villanova is not the only good game or a good, team that he played against this year. He's had some other really good performances as well. So this wasn't the first time that he's done some really good things. Same thing with TJ Spate, Makai Green, Trey Neal as well, of course, with that big touchdown reception and 40 yards on that 1 catch. But, I thought Villanova, there were some times where they really kind of fell back in coverage a little bit too much. And there were a lot of times we were just saying on the broadcast, Josh Derry wide open for 15 yards, wide open for 20 yards. And Monmouth really just did whatever they wanted really on offense. And really they settled into a rhythm from the very beginning, and Villanova had a hard time catching up. And, Steve, we talked about it again on the broadcast the other day, but when you play a team against Monmouth and, you're down by 7 or down by 14, it feels like a lot more just because of how quickly Monmouth can score and just how talented their offense is to put up points really quickly. And Villanova, they were always in that catch-up mode, always in that catch-up game, and they just couldn't catch up at the very end. And this is the first time that Villanova allowed more than 50 points to a conference opponent since October of 2004. It's been a while, and Villanova's defense really struggled. They allowed 637 total yards of offense to Monmouth, 397 in the air, 240 rushing yards, most of them coming from Rodney Nelson. I want to talk about the Villanova offense. Stephen, we'll start with Pat McQuaid, who was 25 for 43. He had 333 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. I thought all in all, McQuaid looked pretty good. The biggest positive to take away from McQuaid, in my opinion, well, there's 2 of them. One is that in the second half, he looked healthy. In the first half, we had a talk, I believe, kind of at halftime. We were off air trying to get, settle with some of the technical difficulties we were having. I didn't think, and I believe you said it as well, that McQuaid was at 100%. I thought he was playing at about 80, 85. He didn't look like he was himself, especially from what we saw against Colgate a few weeks ago. But in the second half, I thought he looked like himself. But the other biggest positive, in addition to McQuaid seeming to come away from that game healthy, was the fact that he didn't turn the ball over. I mean, Monmouth, like I said, had 3 sacks. They had a good amount of pressure on McQuaid through pretty much a lot of the game. But McQuaid, a lot of times, yes, he took some sacks, but he threw the ball away at certain points, which I thought was good. And just overall, he limited throwing the interception, which was something that hurt him last week against Penn State, but obviously hurt him in his career at Nicholls State. So I thought that was 2 big positives to come away from McQuaid. And he still had over 300 passing yards, which if you were to do against pretty much any other team than Monmouth, you probably win this game right at the end of the day. So I thought McQuaid did some good things, but David Abbott was probably the biggest positive for Villanova once again. We said that last week against Penn State. 18 carries, 135 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, and he was averaging more than 7 yards a carry. I mean, that's exactly what you expected heading into the season for David Abbott, and he really backed it up in this game against Monmouth. And now it's back-to-back performances for Abbott where he's really looked like himself from last year, maybe even a little bit better, and that's so exciting for the rest of the CAA schedule.
Yeah, and in addition to that, really, the blame on this game really doesn't fall on the offense. Really, the only thing you could nitpick, and you brought it up, David, was Villanova was a little bit slow out of the gate, but even then,
which hurt them. But they only put up 7 points. They scored on the first drive.
Yeah, and
then didn't score to the end of the second half, or the end of the second quarter.
Yeah, and even then, it just feels a little gross and disingenuous to say that Villanova didn't start that hot because people forget. And again, there was so much scoring, and it's easy for this drive to get lost in the shuffle. Exactly, Villanova, after Josh Derry scores on the second play, and Monmouth is already up 7-0 within the first minute. Villanova, they respond pretty quickly, I would add, right? In a 6-play, 70-something yard drive, possession, throw from McQuaid to Binkowski, the right quarter of the end zone on second down, and then there were 2-3 drives where Villanova really struggled, and sure, if you score on those drives, maybe you give yourself a chance. Maybe they could have gotten one more touchdown, but that feels a little nitpicky, especially since the defense was a clear problem. I think we can all agree with that, and particularly the second half. I don't think there's really many concerns at all. I think that it was firing on all cylinders, both from a rushing and passing perspective. And too, Luke Coella looked really good. He was slow out of the gate, kind of like this Villanova offense at times on certain drives. There were moments in the first half where McQuaid and Coella didn't seem to be on the same page, but then that final drive of the first half, Villanova, they're down 31-7. McQuaid gets Coella involved with a couple nice throws, and then they end up scoring the touchdown late to make it a 17-point game going into the locker room. And again, really good game for him. Nearly hit that 124-yard mark. That is his current career high that he had against Colgate in the home season opener. And also Braden Reed looked really good. 4 catches, 71 yards. Again, we were still figuring out technical difficulties, but Villanova, they score 31-14 at halftime. They get the ball to start the second half, and I believe it was the first or second play. I believe it was the first play. Just total tone setter. You have McQuaid, little RPO action, fakes the handoff, drops back, realizes Monmouth only has one safety. Braden Reed running over the top on a deep post route, cutting from the left side of the field back to the middle. And McQuaid, again, we talked about how he can be a gunslinger. He's good with that deep ball accuracy. He hits Reed in stride, and all of a sudden Villanova's in business. They're in Monmouth territory, and then Abbott ends up scoring a touchdown. And that's when you thought, oh man, Villanova could really make a comeback. And Braden Reed in particular, you really have to feel good, I think, with this Villanova passing attack. Really, besides Lucas Kopecky, who was a little bit quiet. I mean, he extended his single-game reception streak to 14. Coella played really well. Braden Reed played well. Binkowski at the touchdown. And Antonio Johnson continues to be really solid, too, just showing what he can do, not just as a run blocker, but as like a true wide receiver. That one touchdown that Villanova had late, it was a bit meaningless, but again, it's good for the resume, making the loss look not as bad and making the game look a little more competitive. He ran that route on the outside, kind of like a receiver, and showed his ability to get open. So that's what's encouraging, I think, as well. And again, one more thing with David Abbott too. Great game, and you're thinking, Steven, it's against the Monmouth defense. Who cares? But Monmouth's rushing defense has only, heading into this game, only gave up 3 yards a carry, so they weren't as bad as one may think. The real issue with Monmouth's defense really was the secondary, and again, McQuaid took advantage of that. The receivers did, but Abbott in particular had himself a really nice game, his best of the season. Both
teams did not play well on defense, and the offense has really succeeded. I like what you said too about Braden Reed, and when you look at the wide receiver core for Villanova right now, obviously Kenyon Miles is going to be out for some time. In addition to that, Chris Colby was actually injured in this game when he fumbled around the 10-yard line, took a very hard hit. He didn't play the rest of the game. So when you kind of just put that into consideration, Colby and Miles were going to play a role in the offense. You're going to have some younger guys step up, and Binkowski's done an excellent job. Obviously, had his first career touchdown at Penn State, number one, top play on SportsCenter. And then Braden Reed also, like you said, Steve, 4 receptions for 71 yards, had that big 40-yard catch in the second half. Kopecky, I mean, was there, right? 2 catches, 26 yards, especially in that second half when Villanova was trying to, give them any chance that they had to win, which was a very small sliver. Kopecky made some really good catches and also was able to pick up some penalties as well in this Monmouth secondary, which was big in that third quarter where Villanova put up 13 points, their largest scoring quarter of the game. I want to talk about, though, another negative thing, and that was the penalties at the end of the day. 13 penalties, 124 penalty yards. And, I know I said it on the call as well. I thought the refs were playing ticky-tacky at some point in time. And also there was kind of at the end point of the game where I thought that, I believe it was Kopecky was clearly fouled. There was clearly a penalty there and there was no flag thrown by the refs. And then there was a play for Monmouth at the end of the fourth quarter as well that they ended up giving them a penalty when Monmouth was already up by 20, 25. That was very close, really 50-50. So I will say I didn't think the refs called a great game on Saturday. But with that being said, Monmouth was clearly the better team in this game. But the penalties were a big factor, especially early in this game. Some false starts, just some penalties that Villanova shouldn't take. There were a couple unnecessary or unsportsmanlike conduct penalties against Villanova as well. So 13 penalties all in all for 124 yards. For an offense that, put up 637 total yards, they don't need any help. And Villanova just gave them a bunch of penalty yards. That was a big problem, especially in the first half because, we talked about the slow start for the offense, which was, in my opinion, a pretty big factor why Villanova, lost this game. I think the defense was the biggest problem, but the slow start for the offense definitely didn't help. But a lot of those drives were either stopped by some missed catches that kind of were just tipped off some of the hands of the receivers, and then also some penalties in there as well, some false starts that made, third and manageable, third and long, and just some penalties at Villanova. I'm sure Coach Ferrante will talk about it at his press conference either today or tomorrow. Some penalties that Villanova just shouldn't have taken. And, all in all, like we said, I think Villanova is somewhat lucky that this was only an 18-point loss because the way Monmouth played, especially in the first 30 minutes, I mean, it looked like it was going to be worse than that for Villanova.
Yeah, and it adds insult to injury, not only if you're Villanova and you have 13 penalties for over 120 yards and you're really struggling on that front, but also it just hurts even more when Monmouth themselves, they also, as you said, they had their own fair share of penalties. They weren't great at avoiding themselves from being at the mercy to the ref's whistle, right? 7 penalties around a little over 70 yards there given up on their own. And if you're Villanova, it was a mixture of offense and defense. You look in particular, there was a stretch of back-to-back plays. You had a pass interference call on Zamir Dawood on 2nd and 10 as Robertson was throwing the ball to Gavin Nelson. You're thinking, again, Monmouth's up, I believe, 17-7 at this point, and they're driving, and that was the Josh Derry touchdown, or excuse me, the Trey Neal touchdown, the 40-yard throw where he got hit as he threw, and he ended up giving Monmouth a 3-possession lead. And then on the very next play on that drive, 3rd and 4, it was a first down, so I guess it wouldn't have mattered, but 15 additional yards were added on due to an Anthony Hawkins face mask. And it's just over-aggressiveness. And I think, not to excuse it at all if you're Villanova, but at a certain point playing this Monmouth offense, it's got to be frustrating, right? And I think you see this in general just with losing teams, really at any level of football, college, the NFL. If you're losing big time teams, I think especially defensively, they get a little more frustrated. They get a little more aggressive. They're trying to make something happen. They're trying to force turnovers, right? You mentioned, David, that really, again, the only way that Villanova could have really muddied things up in the second half and really orchestrated a crazy comeback would be to force some turnovers. And the way to do that is to be more aggressive, but you also run the risk of, again, getting called for roughing the passer penalty, pass interference, face mask. And then even offensively, too, you're trying to move super quick. That lends you to more false starts. If you're an offensive lineman, you're probably more likely to be called for holding because you're really trying to not give up a sack. You feel the pressure. You're thinking you got to have it on this drive. You don't want to be responsible for giving up a big negative play if you're Jake Picard or Azra Tutu or McCullers or Faye or any of those guys on the line. So, definitely for Villanova, the penalty is something they need to clean up. But also, again, to put things in perspective, it was just tough in the second half. You're down so much. You're trying to make something happen on both sides of the ball.
I do give Villanova a lot of credit, though, for the way that they fought in this game. I know Coach Ferrante mentioned it last week against Penn State, just the effort. I think it would have been very easy for Villanova to head into the locker room down 31-14 and say, all right, guys, let's pack up our bags. Let's head back to the main line. But they didn't. And, like I said, Villanova was only outscored by a point. It was 20-19 in the second half, which I thought was just really promising for the morale of the team. And, Steve, I agree with you because, there were obviously some bad penalties against Villanova defensively. You talked about the face mask. You talked about some of the other calls as well. But Villanova defensively, it really looked like, especially in that fourth quarter, and I get it, the game was over at this point for the most part, but it really looked like that, they said, all right, we're not going to let it get any worse than this. And it very well could have been because Derek Robertson was throwing the ball really well and Rodney Nelson was still doing his thing in the fourth quarter when, like I said, the game was pretty much over. But Villanova did not give up. I thought that was a very big positive because especially in a game like this where, you're in your CAA opener, you're playing at a sold-out stadium at Kessler Stadium, everything's going against you. You're not getting the whistles to go your way. Penalty flags are being thrown. You're giving up a lot of points. I think it would have been very easy for Villanova to kind of give in. But credit to, the players, credit to the coaching staff, of course, Coach Ferrante, Coach Pennypacker, Coach Bowden, to kind of keep the team, all in all, like you said, Steve, a respectable loss. It was an 18-point loss, but it very well could have been in the high 20s, low 30s with the way the game started in the first 30 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I think that, again, we both did a good job again covering the game, and it was great being there. But if we were able to have a time machine and go back to the second half, I think the one thing that we could have focused on more and been maybe a little bit more positive about in hindsight was that, hey, Villanova's at least making this a good loss, because those things matter in college football. It's not like the NFL yesterday where it was big when the Eagles won, right? Because it's just about wins and losses, right? There's obviously advanced analytics and projections on how good teams really are, but in college, it's more than wins and losses. It's who you play, how much you win by, how much you lose by. So, and we'll get to the polls and how maybe this helped Villanova stay in the top 25 in both polls.
I also want to talk about quickly here, you mentioned the turnovers, right? Villanova had one turnover, a fumble in the red zone, which was costly when you look back at it. Monmouth did not have any. The time of possession, too. Villanova, 27 minutes of offense. Monmouth with 32. But why I point that out is because even though it was only a 5-minute or so difference, a little less than that, Monmouth really was able to score very quickly on Villanova's defense, and I think they just wore out very quickly because after playing a team like Penn State last week, I'm sure that the guys were very tired, right? Penn State, a very physical team, second best team in the country, especially when you're outmatched. So that was definitely difficult for them. But also, too, if it wasn't for Villanova to go on that last drive, which ended with a Pat McQuaid touchdown to Antonio Johnson, which took about 7 minutes on the clock, that would have been a much more lopsided result when you look at the time of possession. So 32 to 27 minutes favor Monmouth. That very well could have been like 35 to 23, somewhere around there. So I thought that was also something to bring up as well. And then we'll just end it here with, the yards per play and yards per completion. Villanova had 7 yards per play, 13.3 yards per completion, which, as I said earlier, against any other team, you probably walk away with a pretty confident win. Monmouth, 8.4 yards per play, 19.9 yards per completion. And, what we learned from this game, Villanova still has, a lot of schedule left to go. Their defense has to get better. But Monmouth is a legit contender in the FCS. And it's mainly because of their offense, right? They're not going to win many games where the score's in the 20s. They're just not. They have to play really well on offense. And they have so far in their first 4 games. They're now 3-1 with the only loss to Charlotte, an FBS opponent, where they still look really good, especially in the first half when they had a 14-7 lead. But at the end of the day, I still have concerns about Monmouth's defense, which is probably what's going to hold them back from really making a lot of noise in the FCS playoffs. But this is a really good team. And Villanova, they have yet to beat Monmouth in program history, 0-4. But the Hawks, they just play well against everybody on offense. They have a really, sound rhythm. Derek Robertson is, the best quarterback in the FCS. They have a really good rushing attack, which, we didn't talk a whole lot about Rodney Nelson. I do want to move on here over the next couple minutes and get to some of the other things we have lined up for today, including the William & Mary preview. But Rodney Nelson, you could very well say he was the star of the game for the Hawks, and he was the MVP and the reason why they won. His 33 carries for 186 yards, if that's even cut in half, there's a good chance that this game is a 1 possession, maybe a 10-point game. And Rodney Nelson, how good of a job he did in the fourth quarter. And, we were bringing it up in the beginning of the game and in the pregame show. This is a weakness, right? We said that for for, Monmouth, a rushing attack. And on paper it was, considering how good their offense is. But Rodney Nelson, I mean, he proved why he's a really good running back. And yes, maybe he doesn't get looked at as much because of, the passing attack and how good Robertson is and how good Derry is and the rest of the wide receivers. But Rodney Nelson is a legit running back. And, that really helps Monmouth's offense be even more explosive. He had his best game of the season, one of the best games of his career. He looked really good.
Yeah, he did look very good, and again, I talked about him a little bit earlier, and I'll just add one more thing, too. 33 attempts, 186 yards, 2 touchdowns. We know the stat line, almost 6 yards a carry, but just think about that, right? That, for example, right, you think about David Abbott last week, which was a very good performance. He had about 10 carries, 53 yards. This is against Penn State, so this felt like rushing for, 150 yards against like an FCS-level defense. But I will say a lot of that was influenced by one really long run, and sometimes you see that, right? Not to knock any sort of individual performance, but sometimes you have a really big run that is responsible for most of your yardage. But again, 33 attempts, 186 yards. The longest carry that Rodney Nelson had was just 20 yards. And sure, that probably means, and he didn't have a true maybe highlight reel play, but it's so demoralizing for a defense. In addition to Robertson hitting Derry and Spate and Mekhi Green and Trey Neal, you have Rodney Nelson just consistently picking up 6, 7 yards, 8 yards over and over again, and you just couldn't stop it. And it shows consistency, right, as opposed to getting one really long run and then kind of getting shut down on certain runs. It felt like every single carry he had was for 4 to 5 yards, which had to have been tough for Villanova.
Definitely was, Steve, and it really wore them down defensively, especially in that third quarter where Nelson really began to have a really good performance and eventually iced the game for the Monmouth Hawks. We'll take a break here on Villanova Sports Talk. Again, don't forget to vote on our poll questions at WXVU David S. on Twitter. We come back, we'll talk about the CAA standings update, the power rankings, and also preview Villanova versus William & Mary. You don't want to miss it, Nova Nation. We'll be back in just a couple minutes. You're listening to WXVU V891, The Roar. Welcome back to Villanova Sports Talk here on this Monday afternoon. A little bit overcast outside of Lancaster Avenue. David Szczepanski alongside Stephen Cain. Again, a lot to look forward to over the next 25 minutes or so. We're going to talk about the CAA standings update, the power rankings. We'll preview Villanova versus William & Mary, and we'll also chat with Ryan Scanlon about the Roommate Show podcast coming up. That was the Hoops Mania really replacement on Wednesday. We'll talk about what we saw very quickly for the men's and women's basketball team at the end of today's program. And again, around 12:55 p.m., we'll recap the poll questions, and we'll also announce our special guest who will join us 1 week from today on September the 29th. I want to thank everybody for tuning in as always. Still have half of the show left to go. Steve, we're going to go over to the power rankings, which were dropped. We're going to start with the Opta FCS Stats Perform Top 25 poll. Villanova ranked 11th in this poll last week. They are now ranked 20th, so they dropped 9 spots. Monmouth moves up to 16, and the only other CAA team is Rhode Island. They are also in that 6th spot. So Villanova drops 9 spots. I think that's fair, not too much in terms of where Villanova dropped. And then also to the AFCA coaches poll, Villanova dropped 10 spots from being tied for 12th to number 22. So Villanova drops about 10 spots roughly in both of the major FCS polls. But considering what it could have been, I think Villanova will definitely take it. And again, the top 25 at this point in the season really doesn't mean a whole lot. As we get on the next couple weeks, it will get more important. But it is kind of good to see where every team's, kind of matched up against. And I think one of the biggest things, too, about Villanova is just it's so early in the season, right? They've really only played 2 games you can really look at and kind of judge them on. One of them being Colgate and the other being against Monmouth on Saturday. So that's really the only 2 games you can judge them from. They didn't look great in really either of the Colgate or Monmouth games, but we were able to come out with a win against Colgate and play competitively against Monmouth. So I think all in all, this isn't terrible. But again, these are just good for us in the media to really kind of chat about, see where the team ranks up, and also to just kind of get kind of a look at where the other teams in the CAA are. So what are your thoughts, Steve, on where Villanova is ranked in both the major polls? Yeah, I think it's fair that Villanova got knocked because even though we talked about towards the end of the game, right, McQuaid throwing that touchdown to Johnson, and it makes Villanova's loss look less bad. They lose by under 20 points, which is good. They still lost pretty significantly, right, by 3 scores. So it makes sense that they'd be dinged pretty heavily, moving down 9, 10 spots. They're 20th and 22nd in both the polls. But what's interesting is Monmouth on the other end. Monmouth is 18th and 21st in both polls. Now they're 14th and 16th. It's a pretty big jump.
Yeah. But But I don't know. I would think
it should be higher?
Yeah, maybe a little higher, I'm thinking.
The defense holds them back for sure, because it's still, I mean, they allowed 33 points, which Villanova's offense, I think, is pretty good when you look at the grand scheme of things in the FCS. But I think Monmouth's defense is really why a lot of coaches and a lot of the people who vote for these polls each week are concerned, because let's face it, I mean, they gave up almost 500 yards of offense again.
That's true. And we didn't even really bring this up, I think, even before the game. Bill Connolly is like an ESPN statistician. He has this stat called SP+, which rates college teams both in the FBS and FCS level based on efficiency, and it takes into account tempo, so like the number of plays, and the opponents that each of these teams play against. So someone with an easy schedule doesn't have inflated numbers. It takes all of that into account, tries to make a uniform baseline stat for all these teams. And Monmouth, of course, their offense was super good, inside the top 5 offensively in terms of SP+ across the FCS. And defensively, they were outside the top 100. They were 113th, I believe, which is a huge weakness. I don't think that number is going to change that much, right? When Bill Connolly updates those stats for the next week, when Monmouth plays, Monmouth will have a bye week, but when they play next on October 4th against Delaware State, I'm sure that number isn't going to improve. Maybe a little bit, because, again, that number is not great. Just think of all the teams that have a better defense than Monmouth. But, yeah, certainly a good point. I just think that, and you mentioned in the beginning, I think for the narrative portion of it, Kessler Stadium was sold out. They get a big ranked win against a team that before the loss was 11th or 12th in the country. And Villanova's kind of a sneaky blue blood in FCS circles, and it just felt like a really nice win for Monmouth. So I was just a little surprised there. But again, Rhode Island too, they lead the way in terms of the polls for the CAA once again, 6th and 7th in both of the polls. But otherwise, New Hampshire fell out of the top 25.
Which is not surprising. Tough loss for them.
Yeah, tough loss. Tough loss against Dartmouth, 27-20. Definitely can't have that, but certainly good for Villanova as they play them in 2 weeks' time.
Well, Steve, let's take a look at our CAA rankings, or CAA standings, I should say. I had them pulled up and my browser went away. Going to find them again. Hang tight 1 second out there, everybody. Here we go. All right, these standings, as we said, Rhode Island ranked the highest, of course, in the top 25 polls out of the CAA teams. They are 2-0 in conference play, 4-0 overall. Monmouth, 3-1 overall, 1-0 in conference play in that second spot. William & Mary and, North Carolina A&T also both 1-0 in conference play, but William & Mary has the edge overall, 2-2. Campbell's 1-1. Some teams haven't played a conference game yet, including Elon, Towson, and UNH. And right now, Bryant, Villanova, UAlbany, Hampton, Stony Brook, and Maine all have 1 conference loss and 0 conference wins. So Rhode Island, Monmouth, don't want to say in control of the conference, but doing their best to try to build a lead. William & Mary also hanging tough as well, 1-0 in conference play, 2-2 overall. And that leads us to the game this week, family weekend, our turn, this time at Villanova Stadium, a place where the Wildcats have not lost since September of 2022. 17 consecutive home wins for the Wildcats, where they already won once this season against Colgate. Steve, when you look at William & Mary, obviously a tough team that Villanova is going to manage against, right? They, pretty consensus that they're an above-average team when you look at a lot of the stats and break it down. They played 4 games so far, as I said earlier, 2-2. They lost to Furman 23-21 to begin the season. Then they defeated Maine 28-27. That was their lone conference win. Then a loss to Virginia, as expected, 55-16. Big blowout there. And then they beat Charleston South very easy on Saturday, very easily, 34-7. Was the final score there. So 2-2, they've looked good in a couple of their games. The game against Maine was very close. But when you kind of break down the stats a little bit more, this is a team that averages only 25 points per game. So their offense is definitely way worse than what Villanova was dealing with last week against Monmouth and the week before against Penn State. Their defense allows about 28 points per game. That's their biggest strength, is William & Mary's defense. They're always a team that will play gritty, will play tough. But Steve, when you kind of break down the numbers a little bit more, when you look at the stats in the first half for William & Mary against their opponents, they have been outscored 28-7 in the first quarter and 80-35 in the first half. Now, albeit, good amount of that is from the game against Virginia, but still 28-7 in the first quarter, 80-35 outscored in the first half. To me, that's great for a Villanova team that sometimes gets off to a slow start in the first half. They did against Colgate. They did against Monmouth as well this last week. So that's a positive sign. And also, too, I think just the fact that Villanova has played really 2 tough games on the road, back-to-back, Penn State and at Monmouth. Playing a team like William & Mary that is good, don't get me wrong, you can't overlook them to get to the rest of your schedule, but a team that has, an average, maybe a little bit of a below-average offense, and a team that can give up some points on the defensive side of things, you have to kind of like where Villanova stands heading into this game against William & Mary. In addition to it being family weekend, should be a good crowd, and also Villanova hasn't lost at the friendly confines of Villanova Stadium since 2022.
I would agree with that. And William & Mary, we've sung their praises a bunch. They have a high pedigree in the FCS, kind of like Villanova. They've had 4 straight winning seasons, but kind of digging into the numbers a little bit. Again, last year was a down year for them, just 7-5 overall, 4-4 in CAA play. They did send Charles Grant, who was a great offensive lineman, to the NFL draft, so they're a bit of an offensive line factory. They led the CAA in rushing last season, and again, Ryan McKenna's back on that offensive line. Tariq Sims and Rashad Raymond, 2 transfer backs. They were hoping to get more involved through the first few games of the season. Trey McDonald, Sean McElwain, Carson Jenkins are some of their other weapons, and McDonald and McElwain, really good run-blocking tight ends. You're thinking that William & Mary in the past few years, they've been kind of a physical, run-first type of team, but so far it really hasn't played out that way, right? It's very early. Feels maybe a bit mean to cherry pick like this, but again, it's a small sample. This is all we have to work with, and who knows, maybe things change. But 9th offensively in rushing yards per game in the CAA, so not even in the FCS, right? And think, right, there's some bottom feeders in the CAA, right, too. It's a big conference, so definitely not a great stat. Very surprisingly average, and 11th in terms of rushing defense, right? They have some decent defensive tackles. David DeCidienzo, Ty Gordon, Luke Banbury is a good transfer linebacker that's been pretty solid for them in terms of making tackles on that front 7. So it's just been kind of a bit of a disappointing start, I think, for William & Mary. And even, too, you brought up that Charleston Southern game. They were only up 14-7 at halftime. They needed a late touchdown, short little goal line run from Rashad Raymond to even get a lead going into the locker room. And sure, it was a game really on the surface where it looks like Tyler Hughes is their quarterback, and again, he looked really solid, had 4 touchdowns, and the goal of it maybe was to get some other guys involved because they knew that they had such a talent advantage over Charleston Southern, and they wanted to integrate new guys into the system. Joseph Johnson, Alfred Honesty had their first career receiving touchdowns. Jackson Blee, too, had 2 touchdowns, another tight end. They're very good at the tight end position, if you can't tell. So, but really, just to sum it up with William & Mary, I think it's a bit surprising. You expected a little bit more, I think, in terms of the trenches. They haven't been as good at running the ball and defending the run. And again, I think Tyler Hughes is a bit of a downgrade from what they had last season, and Darius Wilson, somebody who threw for 5,000 yards as a William & Mary Tribe quarterback.
I agree with everything you said there, Stephen. Tyler Hughes getting a chance to really be the starter for the first time in his career. He's been the backup for the last couple seasons. He only threw for 132 yards in 2024. In his college career coming into this year, he only had a little bit more than 300 passing yards. But so far this season, he's off to a pretty decent start. 59 for 91. He has 8 passing touchdowns, only 1 interception, a 65% completion percentage, and he averages almost 200 yards per game in the air. So I think there is definitely something there for William & Mary to work with in Tyler Hughes. Yeah. And then also, too, they will use Noah Brannock as well. He played in 3 games this year, 8 for 17, so small sample size, 111 yards, though. So, yes, now some of it was kind of late in the game, especially, in that Virginia contest. You had Brannock. But overall, they will kind of use 2 quarterbacks somewhat in their offense. But Tyler Hughes is the go-to guy for William & Mary. Then also 2 wide receivers, Steve, you talked about it, very good at the tight end position. Devin Thompson, though, has been a good pickup for them. He's a graduate student. He's a Savannah, Georgia native. He played at D2 Edward Waters the last couple seasons. He was at Stenson before that. In his first year with William & Mary as he played in 4 games, 10 receptions for 204 yards. He also has 2 touchdowns. So again, nothing crazy here in terms of this William & Mary offense, but they have some pieces that definitely can play well. Isaiah Lehman, someone else as well there. And then when you look at the rushing attack, Steve, I thought you brought up a really good point. Rashad Raymond with 58 carries for just 213 yards. He's averaging a little bit more than 3 yards per carry with 3 touchdowns, and he's only averaging 50 yards per game, which is something that William & Mary usually really prides themselves in being able to have that rushing attack. And like you said, Steve, they have some good offensive linemen, but Raymond has kind of struggled to begin the year.
Yeah.
Tyler Hughes himself can scramble a little bit. He's got 187 yards as well, so that's something to keep an eye on, is that Hughes can do it not only in the air but also on the ground. But overall, I agree with what you said, Steve. William and Mary, they are off to somewhat of a disappointing start, but also too, I think you kind of have to look at some of the opponents they played. They did win the game against Charleston South at the end, 34-7. I know it was close at halftime, but the game against Maine was a win, 28-27. I'm not high on Maine. I think they're in the bottom half of the conference.
Yeah.
But then you have a game against Virginia. They were expected to lose. Furman is a pretty good opponent. They only lost by 2 on the road. So when you look at all that combined, I think it's a small sample size for every team, really, when you look at it at this point. And their defense has done some good things. We'll talk about Luke Banbury, who you brought up, Steve, when we were starting to talk about William and Mary. I mean, he's had an awesome season. He has 51 total tackles, 29 solo tackles. He's a linebacker. He's a Cornell transfer. He's been a great pickup. And Harrison Johnson has 1.5 tackles for loss this year, 16 solo tackles, 32 combined tackles. They don't really have a whole lot of sacks as a team. They have, let's see, I had it here written down. They have 6 so far this season. But they've done a pretty good job at just making tackles. Banbury's been really good in terms of a linebacker. And their defense, like I said, as a whole, 28 points per game is what they're averaging, giving up to their opponents. Steve, you talked about it. Their rushing defense has struggled. They allow a little bit more than 200 yards on the ground per game. But their passing defense has been pretty solid. I mean, they average just 6.21 yards per passing attempt, 10 yards per catch, and 170 yards per game. So definitely compared to what Villanova faced last week against Monmouth, this William & Mary defense is much better.
Yeah, and to add to what you said about Luke Banbury, he's a Cornell transfer, played some pretty good football in the Ivy League last season that attracted William and Mary. He comes in, and he's been very solid for the Tribe. Second in tackles. You mentioned that gaudy tackle statistic, all the individual tackles he's racked up, both in the passing and rushing game. So he's second in that stat, and also 5th in passes defended, right? Which just speaks to how he's not just a one-trick pony. He's somebody that not only can come crashing downhill and make a tackle on an opposing running back, but he can also break passes up, especially in zone. He's good at passing receivers off to safeties, and also in man concepts, sticking with tight ends and guarding one-on-one. He's very solid. Harrison Johnson, too, you mentioned, pretty solid tackling numbers. Tackles for loss looks good. 11th in CAA individual tackles. And then Ty Gordon, really the only guy given this William and Mary front four any sort of juice in sacking the quarterback, 15th in sacks in the CAA, which is fine, but again, maybe you expected a little bit more. You do have, again, Davin DeCitienzo there as well, who has struggled a little bit. And you mentioned the passing defense for William and Mary. Jalen Jones has been very, very solid. He actually led the entire FCS, or co-led the entire FCS last season in passes defended, and this season he hasn't really slowed down. 11th in the conference, so not the CAA, but in the conference in individual passes defended. So he's done pretty solid, and he was an All-American last season because of how good he was. So again, something to look out for. We talked about Villanova and how good Luke Coella looked. Again, will Luke Coella and Jalen Jones go off against each other? That could be a fun matchup to watch on Saturday.
Something else too defensively for William and Mary, they have forced 8 fumbles this year. Yeah. 3 of them have been lost by their opponents. So they can force some turnovers. And 2, offensively, I'll just kind of end with, they've struggled on 3rd down. They're 23 for 56, 41%. But on 4th down, 5 for 8, 63%. Small sample size, but albeit a team that will go for it on 4th down and does so at a pretty good success rate. We'll take a break on Villanova Sports Talk. That was our Villanova versus William & Mary preview. We'll talk about our thoughts as well on the poll question towards the end of today's program. Of course, coming up in a little bit, we will announce our special guest who's going to join us 1 week from today. But when we come back from this break, we're going to have Ryan Scanlon join us. We'll talk about our thoughts from the roommate show over the next 5 or 10 minutes. That was back on campus on Wednesday. We'll tell you about everything you need to know with the men's and women's basketball team coming up after this here on WXVU, V891, The Roar. Welcome back to Villanova Sports Talk. Final 10 minutes here on this Monday, September 22nd. David Szczepanski alongside Stephen Cain. Glad to be joined by our broadcasting partner for men's and women's basketball, Ryan Scanlon. Ryan, how you doing today, buddy? Good to see you.
I'm doing good, Steve and Dave. Thank you for having me on. And as always, it's a great another year. My 3rd year doing WXVU. It's just great to have your coverage of Villanova football first and foremost, and you'll have me on in November, and rapid fire from there with Coach Willard in town. Looking forward to a new, refresh start, and hopefully we'll make it past into one shining moment, if you know what I mean.
All right, looking forward to Coach Willard. Of course, the men's and women's basketball team officially starting their season on Wednesday with the Roommate Show recording. Ryan and I were there. Pretty much, for those that don't know that are listening, it replaced Hoops Mania, which was, I'm pretty sure, a long-standing tradition here at Villanova, at least for the last decade or so, where they would bring in usually an outside musical guest or an artist. It was Gunna last year, then it was Rick Ross the year before that, Meek Mill the year before that. Before that, we weren't here, so I'm not 100% sure. But they would usually bring in kind of a musical guest, and they would do a bunch of dances with kind of the men's and women's basketball team. A little bit different this year. They went to the Roommate Show podcast, a live recording, live taping with Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart at the Finn. They were with Jason Kelsey, which was the big Philadelphia local guest that was there that they introduced, which was great. They also had Maddie Segrist on the show. Jay Wright was on the show for a large portion. So a lot of good things really came out of this, and it was good to hear Jay talk about a lot of the different insight from coaching Jalen and Josh. All in all, I thought it was a pretty decent crowd, a good night. Ryan, what were your thoughts on being there? And I know you've witnessed, as we all have, Hoops Mania. How did that compare to Hoops Mania for you in terms of the Roommate Show podcast? I personally thought it was cool to have Jalen and Josh come back for a homecoming.
Well, if I look at the Roommate Show podcast, I think of looking at it from a student perspective and our perspective up in the press box. One being the students, how do you react after, number one, the students didn't trip on the court. We can take that out of their way. But two, the strong part was, having a concert. To, if you're having floor seats, you knew that you were going to be standing for 4 hours, right? There was really no interaction between the new players and the students, which was eye-opening to me, because you really like the interaction between the students and especially the new players. But to me, I didn't really see much of that besides just ranking the dunk contest betwin
which was cool.
It was great, but I think it was a huge turnaround because this is in fact Jay's team, is what Coach Willard said earlier on in his press conference. But if you want to move the mojo, that was a huge step for ripping out what the students wanted in Hoops Mania to a Roommate Show, which is on a hot topic around the main line, because it's Jalen Brunson, a roommate from high school, I believe, and Josh Hart. So to take that Hoops Mania, away from that, I think it's such a huge part to this program, because you take change into consideration, because this is how what Jay wanted, but this is really what Willard wants, and Willard is changing the whole motto of what Villanova basketball is, if you consider that, because Jay Wright, he's on CBS. He took a full-time gig, but now he's a little bit half-time. But there's a sense of in the air where you want to do things a little differently, and I think that's what Willard wanted, because he wanted more community. If you take, Gunna, for example, that's not really community in the way Coach Willard wanted, because he wasn't really a part of the Hoops Mania atmosphere. So I think in the student perspective, as a freshman, you don't know what to expect, but sophomore, junior, senior year, like we are, that's all we ever known. And I think that the hard part was the adjustment, because you're going from, basically a scrimmage to walk out and not bringing in Jason Kelsey till 9:30 at night. But that's what people wanted to see, that Jason Kelsey. And I think that with that one guest, you call it guest speaker on the podcast, that's really what you wanted. And I think the adjustment that the students made was certainly the adjustment that you wanted as the culture's changing from Jay Wright's team to Coach Willard's team.
Well, I don't know how much Coach Willard had in a role of getting the roommate show there. I know that he stressed during his, comments, and this was pretty much before the season as well, the introductory press conference, as well as on Wednesday, that, he was still very much carrying the same tradition and culture that Jay had. I think this is more so the school making a switch here more than anything. I mean, the men's and women's basketball program are a big part of it. Jay Wright was a big part of Hoops Mania, but I think it was more so of the school wanting to pivot to a different direction. Maybe there's, a reason behind it. I'm not sure. And I think Jalen and Josh probably wanted to come back in a way. They, started the podcast fairly recently, and that was probably something they wanted to do at some point in time. And maybe the school couldn't find a guest. Maybe there was some problem. I know a couple of years ago, I believe Rick Ross, I don't think it was officially announced, but I think it may have been like a last minute kind of thing. They had some things happen. But I think all in all, I thought it was a good day, good night. And in a way, it is kind of the first kickoff of the Coach Willard era. And of course, a lot of the changes for the women's basketball team as well, getting some transfers. I thought all in all was a very good atmosphere, especially as the night continued to go on. Kelsey came on, which was a really cool moment. Dafara Gapari won the dunk contest, which was judged by Father Peter, Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, Maddie Segrist, Coach Dillon, Coach Willard were all there. So it was definitely a good, like Ryan said, it was a change, but I think it was a good thing. The question really will be, is it a permanent solution? I don't think it will be back next year. I think if you keep doing it, it's probably going to get a little stale, because how much are they going to talk about that's new, especially because you already brought on Jay Wright. You already had, obviously Jalen and Josh and Maddie Segrist as well. So we'll see how they change it. I would imagine they go back to some sort of Hoops Mania-esque thing next year. Maybe it looks a little differently, but we'll see. But it was a little bit of a change, and obviously for us, we're not used to it, so it definitely was something to get used to. But I thought all in all it was a pretty good success. I want to now talk about the poll questions. Ryan, we'll get your thoughts on the 4 that we have here as well. Steve, I know, Steve, though, you did say that, I don't know if you went to Kelly's or did know about, so pretty much during the taping of the show on Wednesday, Jalen and Josh had said that, they had joked with Father Peter to cancel classes and that they would be at Kelly's after the podcast. Well, it ended up that it was also midnight pretty much when everything had ended. Maybe not midnight, but like 11 o'clock. And they had decided they didn't go to Kelly's. They put out like an apology on social media and said they paid for everybody's tab. What was it, Friday night?
On Saturday night.
Saturday night. Yeah. And how was that for you, Steve?
It was from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. and I thought it was definitely fun. It was definitely crazy. Again, anyone who's been...
It was packed, I'm assuming.
Yeah, all 3 floors. There's 3 floors at Kelly's were completely full.
Now, we went to the Penn State bar. What was it called? We just walked in to get food, and it was too crowded.
Yeah, it was similar to that type
Pickles?
of
I think it was Pickles.
Yeah, it was similar to Pickles.
Crowded.
Yeah, that type of level of crowd. But I just thought it was a cool thing, and in a way it worked out, because if Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart went through with paying for everybody's drinks and actually being at Kelly's on a Wednesday, right? I just think it's better to have it on a weekend so more people can come and participate in all of that. Yeah, I thought it was just better that it ended up happening on a Saturday, and I thought it was cool that there was a heads up ahead of time. I thought it worked out. It was definitely a fun experience for everyone involved.
Absolutely. Let's get to the poll questions here as we begin to wrap things up on this Monday afternoon. Poll question number 1, what is the biggest concern for Villanova football after the loss to Monmouth? Secondary, too many penalties, the rushing defense, or the passing attack? Steve, I'll start with you.
I think the secondary, just because they're a bit young, they're a bit inexperienced. Again, things we've all touched on, not just in this podcast, but in previous iterations of Villanova Sports Talk, previous episodes, I should say. I think the secondary is probably the biggest point of concern. I still have hope. The front 7, I believe in the quality of Hartzell and Abina Wabodo and others, Aiden Howard, Capri Martin, McSween. I think they'll get it going. It's really the secondary. There's some unproven commodities there.
All right, being the football manager, Ryan, we're going to come back to you. We'll talk about the men's basketball. Don't want a conflict of interest there. But for me, I'm going to say the secondary as well. Yeah. 68.4% saying the secondary, 15.8% saying the rushing defense, 10.5% saying the passing attack. Poll question number 2, who will win Saturday's CAA matchup at Villanova Stadium, Villanova or William & Mary?
Villanova. I think, and again, there's early look-ahead lines out. Looking at the Jeff Sagarin ratings, Villanova, they're favored around 6 to 7 points.
Which is a good amount.
Yeah, which is a good amount. And I think pretty fair, right? I think it's a good bounce-back spot for Villanova, coming off a loss. There's a little bit of pressure, right, on Saturday. We were talking about it driving back from West Long Branch, that it's kind of a must-win feel to the William & Mary game. If they lose somehow on Saturday, their season's not over, but I think their hopes of winning the CAA are definitely cooked, and making the playoffs would be a real uphill battle. And right now it kind of feels that way, but if you beat William and Mary and then you pick off New Hampshire and Elon, then the ship has been righted. But it all starts with hopefully a nice win on Saturday.
I definitely agree, and I think Villanova matches up well against William and Mary just because of what we talked about. I mean, they played some really good offenses the last couple of weeks in Penn State and Monmouth. They get a much easier offense to play against. We talked about how Tyler Hughes has had a pretty nice start to his year, but definitely a downgrade from what William and Mary has had the last few seasons. So I'm going to go with Villanova. Ryan, what has been like the mood in the locker room? How are the guys feeling, and do you have a score you want to give out for this game?
I mean, I'm not going to give any scoring predictions, but
sure.
I'm going to say every time a season is upon us, I've learned it myself, being immersed with 90 plus guys from the very beginning. There's going to be a little bit of adversity,
absolutely,
in the season, up, down, whatever. But there doesn't seem to be much of pointing fingers yet. I mean, the team, is very strongly knit together, and if they have a purpose, they want to make that final push to make playoffs, then that's the goal. But it's up to them if they want to put this effort in it. And to me, over the course of my 4 years, doing WXVU, doing football managing, the challenge for me is balancing both. And I think if balancing, basketball and whatever, just to see the football guys just support me and do whatever they do, they will have my back. And whenever something's wrong, they'll always have me to be there on the sideline coming off the field. And I think that's the most important part of the team is Tap the Rock is something that the program and we take very seriously, and something may not go your way each game. The past 2 games hasn't been your best, but there's plenty of season left, and I think Pat McQuaid coming in here, lined up with a great rushing attack, is basically the spark plug that you need after Connor Watkins and company left. And what's best about this program is all those players that had graduated and some of them went to the NFL, they always come back and they always are in the locker room after each postseason game. I think that's what building a program after you've had a starter for 4 years basically is what you need, is just an extra person to tell you that this season is still going on. This season you can still make manageable. This season you can still make playoffs. And that's what makes Tap the Rock so special, because everyone that taps that rock, every play that they made before, you have to forget about it on each play, because the next one's the very, very most important. And going game to game, it's most importantly that we focus on the next one, because that's the most important game. And I think that's the most important thing that Coach Ferrante has said in player meetings and in the team hotel. Just being around all these guys, we do have a sense of fire, or at least I can see a sense of fire that you want to get to that next level and you want to win each game. There will be little bumps in the roads, but it's a matter of how you respond in those certain situations that will project you to the top. And I think with the William Mary type of team, Hughes at quarterback, veteran, it's all about your 111, and I think if we do that, then this team will look past some bumps on the road in Penn State and Monmouth and really look forward to get to the playoffs for a 3rd straight year.
So we're good insight there, Ryan. Of course, we hear a lot about Villanova being a community, especially the football team, and you really see their attitude there. 90.5% saying Villanova will defeat William & Mary. It's a pretty large chunk. Poll question number 3, did you attend the roommate show recording at the Finneran Pavilion, yes or no? Steve, I'm curious, where do you think Nova Nation lies on this?
In terms of yes versus
we're gonna start. Yes. How many percentage of the people that voted do you think went?
I don't have a crazy hot take. I'll say 75-25 yes, like 75 yes, 25%.
20% yes, 80% no.
Wow. Okay.
Now again, small sample size.
Something that they did well though was bring it out to the public.
They did.
Yeah.
Hoops Mania was a student thing.
It was fairly well advertised, but I mean, the crowd, I think, was mainly led by students at the end of the day.
But my point is, from last year to this year, Hoops Mania was strictly Villanova
Sure.
students only. To open up Villanova basketball, I think as a community is something that they did really well this year, because you saw some mom, dad, and little kiddos running the sections. So it really felt like Villanova basketball is back, and certainly to ring in the new year with two amazing players on the New York Knicks, it was pretty amazing experience for me. And as you've seen, Dave, and especially on the icing on the cake was bringing out Jason Kelsey. But I don't think the popular topic of for Jason Kelsey was him. I think it was with Taylor and Travis for most of all.
Yeah, that's a good point. It was definitely, a family atmosphere was there in addition to the students, which is something you get different than if you were just have Hoops Mania. But we'll see if they have it next year. I think that's the biggest thing. We won't be here, but we'll see it from afar. Poll question number 4. Despite the loss, what Villanova football player impressed you the most against Monmouth? David Avid, Antonio Johnson, Pat McQuaid, or Brandon Binkowski? Steve?
I think Pat McQuaid, because 333 passing yards, that was more passing yards, again, very early, but that was more passing yards he had in that single game against Monmouth versus the 2 games he had combined, which just puts things into perspective of just how solid he was, particularly in that second half. And again, not turning it over. He did take a couple sacks, which wasn't great, but again, and I think the mobility was a lot better in those final 30 minutes. There was a little concern with his ankle in the first half and how he couldn't really roll out of the pocket, but we saw a lot of nice rollouts, saw some nice throws, hitting the intermediate deep part of the field. I think McQuaid impressed me the most.
For me, I'm going to go with David Avid, and that's the popular answer here. 18 carries, 135 yards, 3 touchdowns. I just think it's important if they get him back to where he was last year, and I think it was just a slow start in the game against Colgate. It really was. I think it was shaking off some of the rust, because the last 2 games he's been awesome, and that's definitely something that really helped Villanova's offense, because when he was running the ball effectively, Villanova's offense was going, especially in that third quarter. David Avid, 67%. Pat McQuaid and Brandon Binkowski both tied at 16%. But I agree with what you said, with Antonio Johnson. I thought he's also really come onto the scene. That's been big for Villanova, especially with some of the injuries they've had overall as a team defensively and offensively. Time for the big announcement as they wrap up things. Joining us 1 week from today on Monday, September 29th, will be, I wish I had it on the soundboard, Ryan Fannon will be joining us with Villanova, of course, the radio network. Looking forward to it. Ryan, also a WXVU alum. We've had him on many times before. Looking forward to chatting with Ryan. Such a big inspiration for us all. And Ryan's going to break down, pretty much what he's seen the last few weeks for Villanova football and get you ready for the rest of the CAA schedule. Again, 1 week from today at 12:30 p.m. right here on WXVU. We'll be live, though, the whole show from 12 to 1 p.m. Went a little after 1 p.m. today, but some great conversation. I want to thank Ryan for joining us as always, giving us some insight on the football team, the roommate show as well, his thoughts from all of that, and kind of the change of the culture, if you will, somewhat, as Kevin Willard becomes a new head coach for Villanova men's basketball. I really think Jasmine Basco got the loudest introduction of any player, which was good to see because she's been great for Villanova. It was a great freshman year for her last year on the main line. I want to thank Steve, of course, as always, for hosting. I want to thank everybody for tuning in here on this Monday afternoon. Again, we'll see you 1 week from today on Monday, September 29th. For Ryan Scanlon and Stephen Cain, I'm David Szczepanski. Have a great rest of your day. And as always, go Cats!